Hello my gorgeous friends of Webflow, it's your friendly neighborhood Francesco from Supasida here. Have you ever wished your background could feel alive? Not just a static gradient, but something fluid, dynamic, and interactive, like liquid color that reacts to every move. Well, today we're going to make exactly that happen. We'll explore the interactive fluid gradient, starting with the simplest possible setup and then moving on to a more advanced, real-world use case. A full hero section with a CTA hover effect that feels so good you'll want to click it just for fun. And don't worry, you don't need to touch a single line of code. Everything is controlled with custom attributes. By the end of this video, you'll know how to configure every detail: colors, softness, fluid speed, interaction strength, and even how to preview and tweak everything in real time thanks to a hidden GUI. If you're looking forward to it as much as I am, stick around, and if you find my videos helpful and want to support my work, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. But now, if you're ready, let's dive in. So, in this video, we're going to look at two examples. First, a very simple one with the minimum setup possible, and then a more complex case, closer to a real-world scenario, like building a hero section, where you'll see how this effect can be configured with complete freedom to match your own style and needs. Let's start with the first example. The page structure is, as often happens, very straightforward. We begin with a section that has the base class section, plus a combo class, cc-hero. This gives it a minimum height of 100 VH and sets its position to relative. Inside the section, the first element is a simple div block with the class gradient-canvas. We set its position to absolute with the full option, so it fills the section completely thanks to the relative positioning applied earlier. And here's the important part. This element is the canvas where our fluid background will be drawn, and it's the one we'll be configuring throughout this video. It's literally the heart of the effect. We'll come back to it in a moment, but first, let's finish looking at the rest of the structure. Next, we have a container with a class main-container, basically used to set padding and a max width. We also add the combo class cc-hero to make it a flexbox, center its content both vertically and horizontally, and give it the same minimum height of 100 VH as the section. Inside the container, we place a div block with the class section_logo-wrapper. This is another flexbox. Center content with equal width and height, so we can turn it into a circle by setting border radius to 100%. The background color is almost transparent, and we've added a backdrop filter blur to make the look more interesting and stylish. Finally, inside the logo wrapper, we add a code embed element that contains the SVG code for the Webflow logo. The fill attribute is set to current color, so we can easily change the logo's color by simply changing the font color of the embed element. One small note here. Embed elements usually leave a tiny space under the SVG by default. If you reset the display property, you'll notice it. That's why we set its display to flex, just to remove that unwanted gap. And that's the full page structure. Now, let's go back to our gradient canvas element and see what it takes to configure this effect so it actually works. Spoiler alert, it's going to be painfully simple. After selecting the element, head over to the element settings panel, and in the custom attributes section, you'll see one attribute, fc-fluid-gradient equals component. That's it. That's literally all we need. Publish the project, open the live link and wow, immediately with zero effort, you get a beautiful interactive fluid background running on your page. You can already interact with it and enjoy this color combination. Which, by the way, is giving me some serious Todoroki vibes. Any My Hero Academia fans out there? But wait. You might be asking yourself just a couple of questions. Like, how does this even work without me doing basically anything? And second, and what if I want to change the behavior? Maybe tweak the fluid speed, adjust the colors, or change how strongly it reacts to my mouse. I say, great questions, and we'll go through all of that step by step, right after this first demo. All the code that powers this effect is packaged inside a component we very creatively called Interactive Fluid Gradient Scripts. If we open it up, we'll find several embed elements. The first three contain what are called shaders. Quick definition: a shader is just a small program that runs directly on your GPU, telling it how to draw pixels on the screen. In this case, the shaders are responsible for generating the fluid motion and turning our color values into this smooth, dynamic gradient. The last embed element is the one called interactive-fluid-gradient_script, and that's where the actual script lives. And as you can see, there are just a few lines of code in there. One interesting thing to notice is that this whole effect was made possible thanks to a powerful library called THREE.js. Another quick definition: THREE.js is a JavaScript library that makes working with 3D graphics in the browser way easier. Instead of writing hundreds of lines of what's called WebGL code, you can use THREE.js to manage cameras, renderers, and shaders, which is exactly what happens here to bring our gradient background to life. Now, why is it that we didn't need to configure anything ourselves to get this running? The reason is that the script comes with a complete set of default values for all the parameters. That means every setting, brush size, decay, flow speed, color, softness, you name it, already has a sensible value baked in. And that's why we actually have so much freedom here. You can rely entirely on defaults, or you can override them one by one. Which brings us back to the second question we asked earlier. How do we configure this effect in practice? The answer, as you might expect if you've been following this channel, is through a set of custom attributes. You simply apply them to the element with the fc-fluid-gradient=component attribute, which in our case is the gradient canvas. And, just to be clear, it doesn't matter what class name you give the element. The only thing that makes the magic happen is that attribute. At the end of this video, I'll give you the full list of all the available attributes, along with the options you can use to customize every single aspect of this effect. But before we get there, let's address something even more important. Yes, attributes let us configure everything without touching the code. But there are two issues here. One, there are a lot of parameters to adjust if you don't want to stick to the defaults. And two, this is an extremely visual effect, which means the worst possible workflow would be tweak a parameter, publish the project, open the live site, check if it looks right, go back to Webflow, tweak again, republish, and repeat forever until you're finally happy. That would be so painful. So, how do we solve this problem? Well, let's take a look right now. And here's the fun part. All of this is made possible by a single attribute, applied, as always, to the element with fc-fluid-gradient=component attribute. This tiny but mighty attribute unlocks a graphical interface where you can test every configuration and adjust parameters in real time. Yes, you heard that right, real time. All you need to do is select the element with the fc-fluid-gradient equals component attribute. Go to the element settings panel, add a new custom attribute, fc-fluid-gradient-GUI equals true. That's it. Publish the project, open the live link, and you're in. Now you can play with a fully interactive control panel and fine-tune every single parameter until you get the look you want. But let's pause for a second and clarify what these parameters actually do. I'll go over the main ones so you have a solid idea of the possibilities. At the end of this video, as I said, I'll share the full documentation, not just a list of all parameters, but also their types, default values, ranges, and even practical tips on how to use them. Basically a mini encyclopedia you can always come back to. So, here are the key ones. Brush size controls how big the ink brush is when you move your mouse. Larger values mean big wide swirls. Smaller values mean sharper, more detailed trails. Then we have brush strength, which sets how strongly your brush pushes the fluid. Higher values mean very energetic swirls. Lower values, subtle ripples. Next, fluid decay, which defines how quickly the fluid motion fades away. Higher values equal motion lingers longer. Lower values mean motion calms down quickly. Then we have trail length, how long the streaks remain visible before fading. Longer trails feel dreamy. Shorter trails feel snappy. Next, flow speed, a global multiplier for how fast the fluid evolves. High values mean energetic, fast-moving swirls. Low values mean calm, almost frozen effect. And actually, if you set it to 0, the fluid doesn't react at all when you move the mouse over it. Then we have distortion amount. So, how wavy the gradient looks. Higher value means more liquid and psychedelic. Lower value means smoother and easier to read on top of. Next, we have color intensity, which is the overall brightness and vibrancy of the colors. High intensity means neon, eye-catching look. Low intensity means muted, elegant tones. Then we have softness, which feathers color transitions. A higher value means smooth, dreamy blends, and a lower value means crisp, more ink-like edges. Then we also have idle speed, which controls how much motion happens even without interaction. Higher value means constant shimmer, while let's say 0 means completely still background until you interact with the mouse. We also have 4 colors that can be customized. To give you a quick taste, here are 3 example palettes you could try. We have the warm and energetic vibe, relaxed vibe, and finally a sort of dark premium vibe. Very cool, right? So, what's next? If you're in a hurry, you can skip ahead to the final part of the video, where I'll show you exactly where to find the full documentation and share some extra notes on parameter tuning. But if you stick with me for a few more minutes, I'll show you how to apply this effect in more complex scenarios. For example, inside a hero section, even with a simple hover interaction on your favorite CTA button, instantly making it far more engaging. Here we are on a new page where I quickly sketched out a possible hero section. The setup at the start is very similar to the case we already looked at. A section with the class section plus the combo class cc-hero, the gradient canvas, which as always has the attribute fc-fluid-gradient equals component, and a container with the class main container and the combo class cc-hero. The only real difference is this. We've added a div block with the class section_content-wrapper. Here we set it to display flex, direction vertical, alignment center, and gave it a 1 rem gap. We added padding all around, centered the text, slightly rounded the corners, and just like before, gave it a nearly transparent background with a backdrop blur filter for that subtle glossy feel. Of course, we also have our component with all the code included. Now, let's go back to the gradient canvas. Inside the element settings panel, in addition to the usual fc-fluid-gradient equals component attribute, you'll notice a bunch of extra attributes. That's because this time we didn't stick to the default, we actually customized several parameters. We'll see the final effect in just a moment. But what I really wanted to show you is not here. Remember when I said we could use this effect to make something as simple as a hover interaction on your CTA button feel far more engaging? Well, in our hero section we have two CTA buttons. The second one is secondary. The first one is the primary call to action. And this is the one where we want to add a special touch, making the user experience more dynamic and memorable. If we select the button and check the element settings panel, we'll see three attributes applied. fc-fluid-gradient-cta, which sets a multiplier for the color intensity. On hover or focus, the gradient becomes more vibrant or gloomy, depending on the value, being it greater or lower than 1. Then we have fc-fluid-gradient-transition-duration, which defines how long the intensity change takes, in seconds. Finally, we have fc-fluid-gradient-transition-easing, which defines the easing curve for that animation, and the values follow the GSAP documentation for easing functions, but you will find it in the documentation, so no need to worry. Quick tip: for a smoother experience, it's best to match the values of duration and easing with the CSS transitions you're already using on the button hover effect itself. Now let's publish and open the live link. We can already see the background fluid, calm, not too busy, with a very subtle mouse interaction. But here's the fun part. When we hover over the primary CTA button, boom, the color intensity kicks in, exactly as we configured in the designer, adding an extra layer of polish and making the hover interaction feel much more engaging. And now, as promised, in the very last part of this video, I'll show you where to find the complete documentation, and I'll share a couple of final thoughts on the parameters you can use to configure this solution. And here we are at the very end, the documentation. You'll find it right at the bottom of this page, as you might have already guessed. As I mentioned earlier, wherever it made sense, I've included not only the definition of each parameter, but also the type of value it accepts, the default value, the valid range, practical tips on how to use it depending on the effect you want to achieve, and, in some cases, even suggestions on how parameters can work in combination with each other for more advanced results. There are just a couple of additional notes I want to make. The hover option lets you disable mouse interaction completely. In that case, the fluid keeps moving on its own but won't react to the cursor. Then in the documentation you'll also find the attributes related to CTA transitions, specifically the duration and easing options for the hover intensity effect at the very bottom of the page. And here as well, finally, you'll see the parameters for the GUI panel we used to test everything in real time. These include not only the ability to toggle it on or off, but also to change its position on the page and even customize the title displayed at the top. And with that, I think we've covered everything. I truly hope you've picked up something new today, and more importantly, that you'll take this beautiful effect and make it your own in one of your upcoming projects. And that's it for today's tutorial. We've seen how to set up the effect with a bare minimum configuration, experiment with all the main parameters using the real-time GUI, apply it inside a hero section, and even enhance a simple CTA hover to make it more engaging. Everything you saw today is fully clonable, so go ahead, play around and bring this effect into your next project. I can't wait to see what you'll build with it. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell for more Webflow tips and tricks. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Matane!